project is in partnership with the Child Circle, with the Defense for Children Netherlands, with Child Rights Center in Serbia, and with SAPI in Bulgaria. And we are very happy to have you here with us today to discuss about the situation of children in these uncertain times, especially children suspect and accused in criminal proceedings. So we are here to discuss about this with a multidisciplinary panel that I will present to you in a short while, and we will also give you an introduction of what the project focus is about. Just a few technical aspects. For the participants, we will be able to interact with us through the chat that you will see on the right of your screen, or click on the chat below in the on your screen, and you'll be able to ask questions to any of the panelists. The microphone is not functioning because sometimes we encounter difficulties with that, but please free to make any comments that you want in the chat and questions you have. We will really monitor closely the chat. And we are also, so this is what a bit for the technical aspect. This webinar is going to be recorded as the first webinar we had last week, and it will be made available on Child Hub within a day. You have now on your screen also a poll, so to ask if you had participated last week. This is for us to know, so in the other webinar, the first of the webinars on child victims. So we would like to know, and there's a sound, if you, yes, we would like to know if you have participated. So this is for us an interesting piece of information. So just a few preliminary words about focus. This project is about assessing the needs of children in criminal proceedings. It's about some of the specific provisions of the directives on the right of the child, on the procedural safeguards, to really see how we can implement multidisciplinary needs assessments. Rebecca from Child Circle, who is with us today, has helped us in developing this webinar. We'll present to you in a minute what actually individual needs assessments are. We are going to hear from Silvia Randazzo, who is one of our experts working in the Focus project, an independent child justice expert, going to present a bit of the outline of what Focus is trying to achieve in this period. And really, we would like to have today a conversation. You will be actually witnessing, in a way, a conversation to see how the current situation of the pandemic, COVID, has impacted the work of practitioners in assessing the needs of children. We wanted to have this conversation in order to learn lessons, to hear maybe some promising practices and see how you have been trying to overcome the challenges when today is difficult to have maybe face-to-face meetings. So how can you do your work by respecting the rights of the child? The audience that we have today is mainly also with the practitioners working in various fields with children in Europe. So last week I mentioned we had the first webinar on child victims, and we actually have learned quite a bit, and some questions were actually raised on and some example given on how practitioners today, how lawyers were actually conducting interviews with children, how judges would actually approach this, and also a psychological point of view, very interesting last week, to discuss about how the issue of time, for instance, was raised in terms of not really having to rush through the proceedings, knowing that today it's quite difficult to carry the work. So without further ado, I will actually give the floor to Rebecca. If you could tell us a little bit about individual needs assessment and how you see it and what you would like to hear maybe from the panelists today.
Perfect. Just to say that in the Focus project, our starting point was that justice needs to be child-sensitive and child-centered. And this, of course, requires in criminal proceedings that there might be support measures put in place for children, information, interpretation. There may be a need for certain kinds of protection measures. or access to educational measures or special procedures during the criminal investigation itself. Now, different professionals and services are involved in responding to these needs. And what is involved in each case is finding out what an individual child needs. So we start by, the process starts, and what we think about a gateway into the justice process is an individual needs assessment. There is this obligation to carry out an assessment of what the child's situation is. And this obligation is established in the EU law, and we're lucky to have Ingrid Bright from the Commission, from the European Commission, on the call with us today, and she is a linchpin in shepherding that directive. Now, how that obligation, that general obligation to carry out an individual assessment, is implemented and practiced at national level can be very different. We in Focus, as Sylvia will tell us a little more, we started by looking at what was out there in our partner countries, and we saw that different people are involved, very different ways are used, and frankly sometimes it doesn't happen. And when we looked at how children are involved, that varies quite a bit. In summary, and some of you who were with us last week heard us already underline that it can be in the hands of the police and primarily focused on criminal justice, but it can also be in the hands of social services. And then the information feeds into the criminal justice proceedings. And what we did see is that at its very best, it takes an interagency, multidisciplinary form, when services work together to manage the assessment of the child and to feed it into all of those different processes. We saw that in the Barnahus model that is often used in child victims, in responding to the needs of child victims, but that is also sometimes used when child suspects or accused are involved. And of course, the multidisciplinary approach is something that's very much promoted by the EU, both in the law itself and in the softer measures, softer action that the EU can take, as it were, in supporting states. So with that in mind, when we in Focus, again, Sylvia will lead us through what we hope to achieve in the project, but we know there can't be one model. And we're not looking to come up with one model, but what we do think is very useful is standards, identifying standards, formulating standards that should be met by all the national processes when carrying out these assessments and when using them. We've seen there are lots of issues, lots of challenges, but of course also the great opportunity for progress, precisely by stopping and looking at what a child needs, what a child wants, what being involved in a criminal proceeding means for their lives. And whether they have access to the necessary support and services. Now, last week we already, as Mariama said, we looked at what COVID has meant for all of this, and we learned a lot of useful things. There are kind of three ways we can think about it a little bit, and that we can explore further today. How children themselves have been affected by the pandemic. The new pressures that come to bear in their lives, sometimes changed family circumstances with economic recessions. We've also seen new kinds of offences outlined in the law, and maybe other kinds of offences committed by children in these unusual circumstances they find themselves. So how children are affected is something we need to think about together in this call. Then, of course, how professionals are affected by the situation. We know they have difficulties in connecting with children themselves, but also connecting with each other. There's more pressure on time. And then what we saw also, and it's no surprise to anyone on the call, is the system itself under pressure. So, and we'll hear a bit more about that from all our panelists. So all of these problems connect with the role that individual assessments can play. And in fact, we see that this situation shows all the more clearly why we need to have individual needs assessments and how they can help us in these kinds of situations. Firstly, they're kind of helping us keep the child's individual circumstances under focus. Secondly, these individual assessments are ways to make sure professionals can do their work and connect with each other. And through individual assessments, we can find solutions for a system under pressure. Now, obviously, that's the optimistic take. And our job today is to kind of explore and see what we are learning and how to use it. So I'll leave it at that and over to Sylvia.
Mariam, I think you are, muted. So I can just go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
No, I wanted to say thank you, Rebecca, and then maybe Sylvia, you will present to us the focus project. And just wanted to mention that we do have a few participants with us today. That there are at least 4 of our participants that were there in the webinar, and we would like to welcome them again in the webinar today. So thank you. And Sylvia, so if you could say a few words about focus.
Okay, thank you, Mariam. And I'm sorry actually for these people who were there already last week, because I will be repeating a little bit of the focus structure, so you'll be bored for a few minutes, but bear with us. So the focus project, as Mariama mentioned, is a 2 years project funded by the European Commission, and we started exactly a year ago, more or less, January this year. So I'm gonna try to give some context about what we have been doing so far and what we are in the process of doing, and what are going to be the next steps for the next year in all this process of trying to find some sense in this very complex topic that is individual assessments for children. So the first step of the project focus consisted of a mapping exercise, as Rebecca mentioned, that include national reviews of the 5 implementing countries where the project is actually being implemented, and a European review. So this European review or mapping consisted of a brief review of projects, initiatives, and research that aimed already in the context of Europe to know more about individual multidisciplinary assessment for child victims and child suspects. And this review aimed mainly at identifying some key regional learnings on the topic, and to start creating synergies with among ongoing projects, so and among professionals. So also that's one of the reasons we are here, also to talk about these issues with all of you, and we were there last week as well. So the main takeaway of this European mapping, as mentioned already, is that basically we don't have a clear model of a multidisciplinary individual assessment practice, a model that we want to replicate. We also notice that the relevance of these instruments is growing, is increasing, especially after the 2 European directives that we mentioned very frequently, the Victims Directive and the Directive on Procedural Safeguards for Children. But however, the implementation then of individual assessment tools for both the categories of children is still lacking some harmonized guidelines, principles, and standards. So exactly as Rebecca was already putting on the table, so what we thought was the first step, important step, crucial to go ahead, we thought was the development of some standards for individual assessment. So since we cannot use a model, we thought to develop some general standards that the national individual assessment processes should fulfill, regardless of the differences in the different juvenile youth justice approaches. So for each standard, we have drawn the principles, so the statement, the standard itself, the rationale, so the description behind the standard, some indicators, which means showing different ways in which the standard can be in practice fulfilled, and some resources of use for the professionals in the field. So we've been collecting these standards in a document that is in the phase of being finalized, and is going to be used as one of the main learning tools. So it's going to be one of the main training tool, part of a training capacity building package for all multidisciplinary individual assessment for professionals, because the next step, exactly, we are in that phase of developing this training package, because the next step of focus is providing training. So the methodology used here is a train the trainers methodology. So at the beginning of next year, we will provide this training for trainers, the national trainers, that then are going to organize these, unfortunately, online training sessions for obvious reasons, but they so in their own countries. So these trainers are going to implement training sessions in their national context based on the trainers handbook that we've been developing. And as part of the training, an online platform, an online learning environment is going to be also is in the phase of being developed, and is going to be a crucial also support in the training and in the pilot process, and is going to be so used by professionals to consult resources and to exchange among each other. Towards the end of the project, then this training handbook and the materials that we've been producing now and developing now are going to be adapted into e-learning modules, so that will be then accessible towards the end of the project to all professionals, so to all of you who are interested in build your capacity around this topic. Going back to the local training sessions, then after the training session in January, February, we'll, in the next first part of the year, we'll have the actual piloting of individual assessment processes / tools, depending on the status of play in each country. And so the training is going to be a crucial part of this piloting, and some practical tools also being developed in this phase to help professionals and implementing countries in the piloting phase. As a final step, so as towards the end of the project, all these practical tools, the training program, the standards, and the European review, national reviews, all these documents and material produced will be adjusted also based on what we are going to learn from in these occasions, like this exact webinar, but also on the course of the next months through the piloting and training. So they are going to be adapted, and then they are going to be gathered together in one document that we call mutual learning document, that then is going to be like a sort of toolkit and a resource for practitioners and professionals working in the field, specifically on individual assessment for children in Europe. So I think that's a bit of the picture of focus. I hope I get it clear. So thank you, Mariama.
Thank you very, very much, Sylvia, for this brief overview of this. Indeed, you mentioned that this is a complex project. Maybe I would like to mention indeed that it has been quite interesting to be part of several of the conversations that took place between the different brains behind also focus in the countries, Bulgaria, Serbia, with our partners in the Netherlands, and because at the same time we were trying to reach that one model, and we really very quickly understood that we couldn't talk about one model. And so what has now been explained by Rebecca and by Sylvia is that the idea is to come up with a sort of this maybe key ingredients that you'll be able to use in order to really assess as much as possible the needs of children throughout the proceedings. And what was very interesting, for instance, is that very soon we heard when we were talking to the Dutch partners, or in Holland, the assessment really is from the first contact with the police. So we were thinking, okay, can we analyze it from this perspective? And in other countries, they were saying maybe assessment will actually be conducted at a later stage. So we understood that various professionals are involved at various stages. So this is how we quickly left the idea of this idealism of this one model, especially also if we look at the legislation and the text of the directive is actually providing a bit a general guideline, but even the definition itself of assessment is not really provided. And so we hope that with this project focus, we'll be able to help into further defining what assessments are. So as we were very enthusiastic and starting in January with this, and I was a meeting in Budapest in January, very cold Budapest then, we actually then all came back home and were all affected by COVID and the lockdowns, and not being able to meet and to discuss further about all the activity that we had planned face to face. So the project in itself has, as you have understood, many challenges, because today we can't say that the individual assessment that are carried out are all carried out in a same way, uniform way that is being done. So that's why we actually had we were happy that the European Commission had selected our project to do this, but now we had to add this extra level of complexity of doing this work by actually introducing the consideration of we are actually in a pandemic that is probably going to be not only this year, but is going to follow us for maybe also the year to come. So we were very quickly confronted with the question that what do practitioners do? How can we go? How does it affect children? How can we discuss and learn from each other across different countries to see what actually we could do? And this is how we thought that maybe this series of 2 webinars could be helpful in this regard. And we were thinking, and this is how, with inviting also the European Commission to the discussion, is also for us to see maybe that the European Union could help us in further sharing and helping us to diffuse, to disseminate these practices, everything that we are collecting as part of this project. But also I see here we have Bruno Montero. I see here you have your camera on as our partner in another project that is also dealing with individual assessment from the Validity Foundation in Hungary. And so there are various now, maybe 3 or 4 projects working on this, and we are trying to understand from each other's project how we can create these links. So now I would like to introduce a bit better our panelists that we are going to ask them, to which we are going to ask questions. So we have with us today Ingrid Gertrude Breit from the Justice Director General at the European Commission. Ingrid, you are a lawyer by formation, and you have been working with the European Commission for several years. You are currently team leader of the DG Justice department, and you are in charge of procedural rights of suspect and accused person in criminal proceeding. And you are really a key person, the brain behind the directive, the 2016-800 directive on procedural safeguard for children. And you have been involved in numerous drafting and negotiations around this directive. And also you are in charge of monitoring its implementation in the member states. So we are really, really happy to have you here with us. And we were very keen to hear also what would be your point of view when you've been hearing our discussion today. Welcome. We have also Marije Jeltes. Marije is a children's rights lawyer, a researcher, a lecturer, and a child court judge in the Netherlands. You teach at Leiden Law School, and you are a substitute judge in youth courts in Amsterdam and in Rotterdam. You are also a member of the Council for the Administration of Criminal Justice and Protection of Juveniles, which is an independent body established by law that gives advice in the form of recommendations to the Minister and the State Secretary of Security and Justice, as well as the State Secretary for Health, Welfare and Sport in the Netherlands. So we're also very excited that you could join us today in this conversation. We have Corina Fominov. I saw you on the screen, so I hope you are still with us. Corina, you are a police officer that is working in the detention center of Brăila Tichilescu in Romania. You have graduated from the Police Academy in 2015, and your main task is to help children to adapt to prison environments, to take care and manage their educational issues, and in your daily work, you use multidisciplinary approaches to deal with children. You actually conduct individual interviews with them, discussions, and you try to discuss with them about their attitudes, their education, their work. And you do this by using individual educational plans. So we are very happy to welcome you here and are very keen to hear about the experience of working in the detention center, doing assessment in this time of COVID. Welcome. We have Angela Vigil, that is our pro bono and supporter of Terre des Hommes and our important partner of Baker McKenzie, a pro bono director at Baker McKenzie. You are a practicing lawyer representing children in juvenile justice, in child welfare, human trafficking, immigration, and other areas of policy advocacy. And you are based in the US. But you are very aware of what is being carried out because you are very much involved with also your work in Europe. And so we are very keen to hear your perspective also from a lawyers working with judges directly. Welcome. And we have Lynne Cosmans, who is a restorative justice mediator. Lynne, you have graduated as a criminologist and sexologist. You currently work as a therapist with adults in a forensic setting, with people who got involved in assault, domestic violence, and sex offenses. We are very happy to have you here with us and to bring to this conversation the perspective of restorative justice, which we believe is extremely important. Welcome, Lynne. So, so to start with this, we would like to launch this question to each of you about the impact of COVID-19 on children and on individual assessments. So if you could, each of you, say a few words about your day-to-day work and what you see were challenges that most affected children and the practitioners because of this COVID-19 pandemic. As we have discussed now, individual assessment for children in criminal proceedings have an important impact at all stages of the proceeding. So I would like to start with you, Ingrid, maybe to give, you are not a practitioner in the field, working at the European Commission, we were interested to hear from you a bit of an overview of what you have heard of what might have been today issues or what came up to the level of the European Commission, maybe in relation to individual assessment of children in conflict with the law. And what would you like to share with us today?
Dear Mariama, thank you very much for this kind introduction and for this invitation to participate today in this discussion. As you mentioned, I have been very actively involved in the negotiation of the Directive on Procedural Safeguards for Children. And I'm very much attached to this piece of legislation. So I think it's very important. It's a very important legal instrument which hopefully has a considerable impact on the situation of children who are in conflict with the law in the European Union. And I think projects like this one are very important to support, in particular, the application of this directive in practice. What is the impact of COVID on children and children in juvenile justice? I think, first of all, let's say in a general manner, COVID affects the life of children in a very significant way in general. So of course it affects the social behavior of children. They have much less social contact. There are contact restrictions, there are restrictions on social activities, on sports activities, on schooling. So they have less access to education. Many children do not have access to online schooling. There are problems with digital equipment. Then there is also deterioration of the economic and social background for many families, parents who lose their jobs, children 16, 17 years old who do not find jobs and are therefore more, let's say, that there is a stronger risk for these children to get in conflict with the law in general. So I think children who are already vulnerable by definition, they're exposed to a higher vulnerability in the case of the COVID pandemic. With regard to juvenile justice, more specifically, we have seen that during the lockdowns in spring, but also now, many courts have closed. So this leads, of course, to a delay of proceedings, to backlogs in cases, to difficulties carrying out multidisciplinary approaches with regard to individual assessments. This also leads to restrictions of defense rights of children in general. It's more difficult for them to have access to a lawyer, for example. There are restrictions on their access to the case file. There are restrictions, or it becomes more difficult if they need interpreters, translation services for those children who do not properly speak the language of the proceedings. It has also an impact on the right to be present at the hearings, because sometimes there are no hearings. It has also a considerable impact on children who are in prisons, in the detention facilities. Also here, many children did not have the possibility of contact with parents, with lawyers. There are restrictions on the sanitary conditions of the detainees. There is a higher risk of children in detention or pre-trial detention to get sick. They also have more difficulties in exceeding the social worker services, people involved in carrying out the individual assessments. There are delays in general, so everything becomes much more complex in a situation which for children is of course already very complex and difficult when they are in conflict with the law. So I think I set a bit, let's say, the general framework, and I leave it for the moment with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ingrid. Indeed, you're listing here, I guess, a non-exhaustive list of issues that we are encountering with in this time of COVID, and you're mentioning quite a few aspects indeed that relate to, so you mentioned the defense, access to lawyers, the situation in detention, and indeed the economical impact that it has, and the increased level of vulnerability. Those are some of the points we will address today. So I want to maybe, if you mentioned this difficulty of accessing a lawyer, I want to ask Marije about you, and to say that we maybe can see from what we understood, at least from the initial review, that Netherlands has a quite developed systems in terms of assessing the needs of children. But hearing now what Ingrid has been saying, do you see also some of these challenges and how COVID has impacted children, or does it, or doesn't it have? If you would like to share with us some of your views.
Yes, thank you, Mariama, for the invitation, first of all, and thank you for all your presence here. Yes, I think we have quite a developed system already. We have the Child Care and Protection Board, a national agency who is conducting the individual assessments once the child is in custody. So they will be informed quite quickly about the detention or the pre-adult detention, and make that assessment. Everything that Ingrid mentioned is the same in Holland. We encounter all those problems without exclusion of one of them. So, but that mainly is during the trial or towards the trial, those problems occur. But when we see at the individual assessment, which happens quite quickly once a child is in detention, or a suspect of a crime, then we see that depending on the situation in the police office, that assessment will happen in person or via telephone. And of course, that's problematic or can be problematic, because what is important about communication with children is their non-verbal communication, is having a bond with the child, make them feel welcome and that you can be trusted, and that you can and you are there to help them. That's much more difficult to convey in a telephonic communication, communication by telephone, than personal. So I talked to the strategy director of the national of this board, and she mentioned that depending on the local situation in the police office, they go there in person or via telephone. And of course, they encounter problems with that situation. And even when they can go there by themselves, the situation is not always COVID-proof. So no ventilation, small rooms with the screen, the transparent screens that are too small. So that's not always safe, and that might be problematic as well. And the time is an issue, because those assessments, the Child Care and Protection Board talks to parents as well, to teachers if they can. Well, everybody is working at home, cannot be reached easily sometimes. Logistics is a problem, administrative systems, so ICT problems are there, to access information, to transfer information, privacy. So there are a lot of issues as well to make that individual assessment and to present that to court, that have to be in a very short time. And if you cannot reach people or cannot see them eye to eye and level with the children, that might be an obstacle. So they notice that as well. And that's unfortunate in this situation, but they're doing what they can by phone mainly, if it's not possible to see eye to eye. But the time issue is also problematic. Everything takes longer to reach people, and then you have to make the court date is quite quickly, within 3 days of that individual assessment. So you have to be, and sometimes 1 day after that. So you have to finish that quickly, and make a full good assessment might be problematic then. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Maria, thank you for this, giving this concrete example in the Netherlands, and indeed we will come also, and we will ask you after, maybe to dig in a little bit into what you say in terms of this issue of the contact with children, and maybe share with us after a bit of a more maybe precise case, and how you deal with this, with that distance. And indeed, you're pointing out one of the key elements about this nonverbal communication. And I'm thinking, before we go into this more specific point, I wanted to revert to go to Corina Fominov in Romania. We are hearing now about how in the Netherlands where they are trying to conduct face-to-face as much as possible, but still there's assessment or discussion with children that happen online. So how is it now with your work in detention, where the children are in, deprived of liberty? So how do you contact them in this time of COVID in Romania? How is the situation, and how COVID-proof are you when you are conducting your work? If you could share with us a bit your experience.
Yes, I can share with you the situation from my perspective of a police officer, and I want you to understand that the pandemic didn't influence our activity, because we go to work every day. We assess children that committed crime every day and face to face, respecting the rules, COVID rules. That didn't affect our activity. So we have a normal activity. We don't work from home, and the fact that we are with them day by day is helping very well our educational system. Our job to assess them during the period they stay in the detention center.
Okay, and I was wondering, because when we were preparing for this discussion, you were sharing about the example of one of the young person that you were working with, who actually, there was a bit of a link, let's say, because we were quite surprised, because it's true, we noticed that in Europe, there are now very quite different measures taken in the lockdown. And we heard that you are actually continuing the work during this pandemic, but implementing some of the rules. But would there be a case at which children were affected by COVID or in their behaviors?
Yes, as I told you yesterday, the case that a boy, 16 years old, that was working before the pandemic, and when the pandemic came, he didn't have where to hire, so he didn't have money to, I don't know how to say, to survive. So he was forced to steal from a store. He stole some money, not a very big sum of money, just to buy food. So he was brought to the detention center. He was very sorry that he did that, but he was saying that he had no chance to get money from otherwhere. So he was forced to steal. But just one case, because as I told you yesterday, we have a pattern of committing crimes. The crimes usually in Romania are related to a financial, a very bad financial support.
Okay, thank you. And this actually refers to what you're saying, this a bit of the economical stress that also Ingrid was mentioning as a tendency that was observed in other countries. So before we go a bit further in this, I would like to ask maybe Lynne, from your perspective, and also when I presented you, I didn't present that you actually have been working for over 7 years as a victim offender mediator and family group conference mediator in Belgium with juvenile offenders. And that you work with the youth detention centers, with integration of ex-prisoners on probation, and also the welfare in the Brussels prison. So from your perspective, we just heard the situation in Romania. So if you look now, let's say from the angle of restorative justice, do you see actually here a greater need of restorative justice now that we are in the middle of this pandemic? What do you think? We also, in one of the preparatory discussions with Marije, we're mentioning that maybe there has been some tendency, maybe some observation of increase of certain crimes. Is that something that you actually observe, or do you see restorative justice could be one response, linking it with assessments?
Hi. Okay, so that's a lot of questions in one.
Yes.
I'll try to give a bit of my experiences today. If you talk about restorative justice, then I think the last couple of months I was surprised how there's a contrast between we notice that the physical connection between each other is now becoming something very dangerous. Everyone doesn't want to connect, but the idea behind restorative justice is all about connection. So yes, I think it's the most important thing now to still find ways to keep this connection, especially with children and youth. And I do believe that maybe, of course, I don't want to generalize, but we as adults are maybe more uncomfortable with digitalization, online stuff, chatting, etc. But most of the youngsters that I see, they don't mind actually. So maybe we just need to make some clicks in our heads and not in their heads to keep these connections. Something that I find really important also is that feelings aren't going into lockdown. So, and especially the things that Ingrid mentioned that are happening. I see a lot of youngsters that they can't go to school anymore. They can't go to their youth movements anymore, etc., etc. So they lose all types of contact, but also it can trigger underlying traumas or re-traumatize some things. So that's also a thing to keep in mind, I think. But for my daily work, I also just keep on working. We do online, the team meetings, etc. are online, but my face-to-face meetings, we just try to do this as much as possible, regarding all precautions, of course, masks and distance and ventilation, etc.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. You're using indeed some key words about the connection between people, the fact that the feelings do not disappear with lockdown. And I'm thinking, and just before I move to you, Angela, because what Lynne is just mentioning about digitalization, I think relates to one of the points that you were also raising. And I want to mention that in the chat is very interesting. People are sharing where they come from and or what their professions are, where we have quite a set of lawyers listening to us and social workers. So we have a mix of lawyers, social workers, and welcome also to some of the colleagues from other countries. I see DCI also Italy with this EU project with the Juvenile Justice, also working on the individual needs assessment. So we're happy that you can actually join us. Yes, so Angela, would you like to say something about that from your perspective as a lawyer and this aspect of connection, digitalization, and the impact of COVID on the work with children?
Yes, I so agree. I'm having this experience with many of my clients that while it's uncomfortable for everyone else to attend a court hearing that looks like this screen, it is much less uncomfortable for my 15, 16-year-old, especially female clients, to attend a screen-based court because they spend their entire lives looking at tiny boxes and pictures of themselves. And they're more comfortable that way. One of my clients said to me, she found it easier not to have to walk through, as she pointed out, all the people in court that hate her and in order to talk to the judge. That's an exaggeration, but it's her perspective. And I think that's the sort of what I would like to capture in my comments about my day-to-day is this idea of staying child-centered, as Rebecca was talking about, and how COVID makes that even harder than it was. One of my clients that lives in a different place, so we talk by Zoom, looked in the screen the other day and said, COVID makes my pimples look bigger. And I thought the same thing about the child justice system, right? Things we already had, pimples on our system, are just exaggerated under these circumstances. For example, taking the time to do an assessment, and taking the time to read and use the assessment, and taking the time to apply the assessment just seems to be something that's getting lost in the digital connections and the short hearings or the no hearings, like Ingrid referred to, that just seem happening when a juvenile justice system gets crushed by all of the things that COVID brings with it. We're finding we're already kids, a pimple. There were already children that didn't belong in the juvenile justice system. Assessments would help get them out, but if we can't take the time to do them and stay child-centered on what are we doing here in the first place, all of the things that just become mechanized and regular and, well, there was an arrest, so we're gonna have a case, rather than wait, let's stop and reconsider each child individually and maybe move a lot of these kids out of the system, just gets lost in the process. And that's much worse during COVID than even in.
Yeah, interesting. This point of view too. The magnifying glass of COVID, maybe, making everything that looks bigger. So we don't always like to see, but it's at the same time a reflection of who we are, what we can do. So I think that maybe what you're saying for me is quite a nice transition to getting a bit more specific about some of the examples that we could actually share with the practitioners today, and looking at how I would start with Marije in terms of maybe some concrete example in the Netherlands of how, as professionals, you have been engaging with children and children with each other and the professionals with each other, undertaking individual assessments and using them within your responsibility. So it would be interesting, I think, for the practitioners that we have today, again, also so that we have also, I saw some mediators, and I see also that actually it's quite active on the chat. Various people from other projects are part of us, so are part of our group. So to hear from you a bit of a concrete case, because it might generate some ideas in terms of how did you manage to solve the issue, knowing that in the Netherlands, it was not, it was what they call a light lockdown. So you still could somehow have face-to-face, but not always.
Yes, thank you. Actually, something that Angela and Lynne were saying resonated with me, because we noticed that children are quite tech savvy, and they feel a lot of times they feel more comfortable talking through the phone than going to an office, and with a lot of anxiety to meet professionals, and don't feel comfortable, or they don't show up. And what happens when you contact them by telephone, they feel a little bit more safe in their own surroundings, and more detached from sitting across somebody who wants to know everything about you. So we also noticed that there are also some silver linings, and actually the council of the Child Care and Protection Board said we want to implement conversations by phone. Actually, we want to do that more often, because we noticed that the children pick up their phone. Of course, they can refuse you as well, but they are much more likely to get in touch with you, or sending a text, or sending an app, or stay in touch and tell what they want to tell you. So there are also some good things about that came up with COVID. That kind of communication can be, for some people, can be less comfortable, but for some children it can be more comfortable as well. So what we noticed with the individual assessment, that making contact was a little bit more difficult, as I mentioned before. If you're going by telephone and you have to talk about your past and everything for the first time, when you encounter somebody and you have to tell them everything that the judge has to know, that might be uncomfortable. And of course, sitting across somebody and seeing what happens with the child when you ask a question or making conversation can add to the report as well, to the assessment as well. And unfortunately, that happened during the lockdown as well. What I mentioned before, the time was an issue to get all the information in time. And as a judge, we noticed as well that the reports were taking more time, weren't that elaborate sometimes. And you see they have to make a log who they've spoken to and in what way. And we noticed everything was by telephone. And sometimes it was very difficult to reach people, because normally the people from the board invite parents and the children at their office, and in some cases go to people at home, which wasn't possible. So I talked to people who make those reports as well, because it was standing out when I was in court as well, about the depth of the reports that they mentioned. They had trouble going a little bit deeper into the information, because of the lack of the personal contact and lack of connection between the different institutions they had to provide information. So a direct solution wasn't there. Just hang in there and make sure, as the people who work at the Child Protection Board have to be very persistent to get the information. But sometimes we got in court, and the individual assessment report should have been there. But when we're in court, it wasn't there, or they brought it directly in court. So we couldn't prepare, we couldn't read. So we had to suspend the meeting, or make a pause and then come back to court. So it affected also the efficiency of the court hearings. And there was no easy solution for that, but everybody said, yes, I sent it, and sorry, we couldn't get it any sooner. So the apologies were absolutely sincere, and we understood that there was some limitation to the work they had to do. And easy solutions weren't there, except being persistent and hoping that the child would stay in touch and give the information and want to contribute, like the parents. But of course, they noticed that there was also a lot of stress with the parents and with the children who didn't go to school at that time, and had to appear in court or couldn't appear in court and had to do it by telephone. So there was a lot of, you could feel the anxiety a lot of times in court as well, from the children and the parents. Okay. But yeah, Skyping in court, for example, and Skyping between the people who make the individual assessment, doing everything by phone, you can mitigate that a little bit or balance that a little bit, but it's not the way it should be. But it's the closest you can get in these circumstances, I think.
And Marije, I'm wondering, when you are talking about, we didn't arrive in COVID with a perfect system, as we have been discussing. So, and if we're now talking about, I have this idea of this magnifying glass, if it increases the issue. So now we hear about the challenges of COVID, and maybe it's a bit provocative, but are we using the excuse of COVID to actually cover some work that is not always being done properly? Or are we able to distinguish between when assessments are actually carried out properly, the way it should? So were there a system that was already done properly and just COVID came with the complexity? Or is it sometimes an excuse to actually not carry the work the way that it should be done?
I think as a judge and as a former criminal defense lawyer for children, I think the Dutch system worked quite well before this happened. And we saw limitations, of course, but it wasn't that it was magnified due to COVID. The procedure was worked quite well. Of course, before COVID, some reports were late as well. And that's just magnified through COVID, that the systems weren't working properly and the administration between the board and the court and the lawyers wasn't working properly. So in a way, yes, it magnified some logistic problems, but the intent of the people who make that assessment and the way they want to make a connection with the children and get the information they need to guide the child in court, I think that was the intention was really good already, and this was only a hindrance, COVID, to make that connection properly. And then the other side, like I mentioned, it figured out also some aspect that not all contact or additional conversation have to be in person to make a connection and to stay in touch with the child. You can also do that by phone. So it also highlighted something else, a new direction. So it's not all challenging. It brought some solutions as well to stay in touch with children. So it's not all negative, I think. And I think that the Dutch system is working quite well. And only the logistics parts weren't that good either, and now it came out. But the idea of how to connect and what information you need to make an individual assessment, that was always good, I think. Yeah. Okay,
so here you are in a way a bit highlighting what are the opportunities that are given by COVID also, let's say, to try to see in a system that you consider as working quite well, and trying to go and avoiding a bit the obstacles of this. And I was wondering, Angela, thinking of this, you also mentioned once to us the idea of making a link a bit with the brain development for children. And so we're talking about the impact of COVID. We are talking now here, we heard Lynne saying about connections, about feelings, about, okay, yes, that maybe we're used to the digitalization and we as professionals, adults need to adapt to this also evolving world. But is there something between also the behaviors of children that committed an offense and brain development and COVID that you would like to share with us?
Well, we know that adolescence is temporary. I say that understanding this is a multidisciplinary gathering, so others can dive into that much deeper than a lawyer can. but therefore delinquency is temporary. And we know that partly because of emotional and mental and personal development, but also because of brain development. So it's I think, universally accepted and understood now that we all know that the brain doesn't finish developing until at the earliest age 18, and according to some scientists at the latest 23 and higher. So we're talking about a group of people whose frontal lobe isn't finished developing yet. And in the frontal lobe are those important characteristics that adults need, like long-term decision-making and being able to not be overly influenced by peers, more than just present moment thinking. Present moment thinking is what COVID is all about. So this idea that we're all just sort of making decisions for right now, and this will be over, and I might steal food, not thinking about the long-term consequences of it because it doesn't even seem like it's a real life, I think really affects these children, and it needs more time for thoughtful responses and assessments, and this should have been in the social services field rather than in the criminal justice field. In online crimes, we are finding this is the same thing but on steroids, right? Because if you don't think about long-term sort of consequences of what you're doing, the idea that you could be doing something right now on a phone that is just between you and the phone that has these longer-term consequences is completely absent. Because of this sort of false dichotomy. So all of that, all of those steps that the juvenile justice system around the world has taken to understand these concepts and implement these concepts, not only in sentencing and long-term extreme sentencing, but also in quick decisions about which children belong in the system at all, we're all sort of getting put along the wayside or in favor of emergency solutions and quick steps. And we won't even have a hearing about this. We'll just sort of process this in the juvenile justice system. I think it's hurting the restorative justice movement. I think it's delaying everything that we know about brain development that was really moving us on a course towards smarter solutions, especially to children involved in much more serious offenses that have long-term extreme detention consequences, which is where most of my work sits. All of those sort of considerations come from people sitting around a table thinking about the best way to address what has happened as a community. And there's no more table.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you're sharing with us, really. And I think it brings a very good light. It brings me also back to what we discussed last week. Again, this concept of time. We had two psychologists around our table when we discussed about the situation of child victims. And so indeed, and quite a lengthy discussion also about this, how do you actually manage this time by not, you need to have speedy, let's say, proceedings to, because one of the criticism also in juvenile justice is also the fact that sometimes proceeding takes too much time, it takes too long, and now we are maybe rushing through things, so then we don't take actually properly the time to listen to the children. So one of the questions also is about if we look towards the future and a bit the next steps and how we can progress and in this area, and thinking, okay, if we are another 1 or 2 years working in these challenging circumstances, what can we do? And also, is it that in any case we need to have the children expressing themselves? And this is again one of those challenging questions towards the right to participate to children. Is there a right for children not to participate? Do actually children, when they speak, understand the implication of what they say when they are involved in individual assessment? So, Angela, when we are talking here, like, is there something that you want to share with us about this also, this idea of the right to speak and not to speak?
There are a lot of folks on the chat who said that they are or have been defense lawyers for children. So I hope that this is not as unpopular as it is in other groups, but the idea that children are obligated to participate in assessments is something that should be balanced out at least, and I think would be rejected in favor of a child's right to decide whether they express anything involved in the criminal justice system because it can be used against them. And that's a challenge. As a defense attorney in a juvenile justice proceeding, I can see heads shaking, but we live in that space of that tension all the time, right? Because you want as much great information out about your kid as possible to make sure that the right solutions and services are given to them. But you don't want so much out that everyone realizes, oh, this child really has all these challenges and services aren't going to be helpful. We have to do something more extreme. And you actually get your child deeper involved in a system that they don't belong in. I think one of the steps, and I know that Focus is spending a lot of time thinking about this, but one of the very important steps we all have to take is at every stage of a proceeding, we need to make the time to make sure that young people are asked if they want to participate in any of these conversations by phone, Zoom proceedings, whatever these are. They don't have to. The European Commission guidelines, there's all kinds of principles that confirm that they don't have to make statements that could be used in any way against them. But I think as child rights and child services people, sometimes we don't think about statements children are making about their needs as statements against them. I once lost a horrendous hearing on behalf of a child who in our US courts, we were deciding whether or not to decide to try as an adult or as a child at 14. So he would have been subject to life in prison until he was 80 versus prison until the age of 21. And I lost that hearing because we put on so much information about his therapeutic needs and all of the assessments and all of the psychological damage that had been done to him over 14 years of tragedy, that the judge decided there was no rehabilitative services that could work. And nothing in the children's justice system so moved them. That doesn't happen in systems in Europe nearly like it happens here, and that's great. But the principle that we have to make sure that children are asked and given the opportunities not to give information all the way along the way, I think is critical. And it's embraced by all forward-thinking, evaluative, multidisciplinary processes.
Thank you, Angela. So when I hear you, I want to refer to Ingrid actually about what Angela is now sharing and what it brings up in terms of thoughts when you also have been so involved into drafting this directive, and there must have been discussions about the child participation within let's say the procedural safeguard. And also we know that the European Commission is now developing the next 4-year strategy on the rights of the child, and that for this you have consulted, if I'm not wrong, over 10,000 children. And so what is your view here, if you wanted to share with us, and maybe from what you have been hearing today about some of the challenges, the practical challenges, and some of the examples related to the work that is being done at the level of the European Commission?
Thanks a lot. I think this has been really of great interest. And with regard to Angela's intervention, I would really like to underline that I mean, the purpose of this directive on procedure safeguards was really to assist the children and to ensure that they have a right to participate and to effectively participate in the proceedings. So it's very important that the children understand what is actually going on in the proceedings. There is also, I would like to draw your attention also to another piece of legislation, which is the Directive on Presumption of Innocence, which also provides for the right not to incriminate oneself. So that, which is of course very important, which is, well, it's not only for children, but for all suspects and accused persons. But they may not be forced to give a statement in which the suspects or accused incriminate themselves before the court. With regard to the child participation in the upcoming EU strategy on the rights of children, the Commission has organized end of September, beginning of October, a very big event, the EU Forum on the Rights of the Child, where also many children have participated. There was also a panel on juvenile justice, which was organized, and where practitioners, lawyers, judges have participated. There is a public consultation which is currently ongoing still until the 8th of December, and children are also consulted online and via focus groups by child rights organizations. Major implication of children, and it's very important for the children that for the Commission that the voices of the children are heard in the context of this consultation, which will then lead to this new strategy on the rights of the child, which is envisaged for adoption in spring next year. This EU strategy will certainly cover very different aspects of the rights of children, and it will also touch upon child-friendly justice, how to further improve child-friendly justice. We need absolutely to ensure that children in conflict with the law have their rights respected and their needs addressed within the European Union.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. It's very good to hear that indeed there was a very wide consultation of children, and I think many of our organizations here also have been participating to the EU Forum, which was, I believe, a success meeting. And also we have been with other organizations part of submitting a policy brief on the chapter on child-friendly justice. So there's been submitted to the European Commission, and we hope that some of the considerations will be taken on board. So in the meantime, I see that we had Annemieke and Bruno that would like to share something with us. We managed to organize a bit the microphone unmuting. So I would like to give the floor to Annemieke to share comments you had on restorative justice, and then I will go to Bruno, if you could share. Hi, Annemieke. Hello.
Hi. Yeah. Hello. I'm Annemieke Wolshuis, a researcher, trainer, and from the Netherlands. Also a substitute judge recently, a colleague of Marije, although we didn't meet in court yet. Yeah, restorative justice can play a role in this field of child participation, of course, and to be heard. The link with assessments is still, yeah, we have to figure it out. You know, in the Netherlands, we try also with the team of people who work on mediation in penal cases, also how mediation in penal cases can actually make sure that the backlog disappears. There's a lot of, they try to work around this. At the same time, you see that also within using restorative justice interventions, we need to use some kind of assessments as well, risk assessments and so on. So we are trying to see how much we can work on that. In the Netherlands, we see that it's often still a lot of expertise from the individual mediator, and so instead of really a clear protocol. Restorative justice can also be what Lynne said. In this COVID times, we tried mainly to, when we work with children, and that's what Marije also said, to try to keep on working live and have live assessments and have live restorative justice interventions, but also some, I see it with the neighborhood mediation I'm doing. We had a period that we tried it online, but we are much more happy with the live sessions that are taking place now again. On the other hand, what Marije said, sometimes we also learn from doing things more by phone or you know, this. I'm also involved with HALT in the Netherlands, and they had to do all their learning schemes and the things they do with youngsters who committed minor offenses. They had to do that online, and they learn from it. They will in the future do things more online probably, you know, so there is this learning from each other. And I also have, like many of you, so many different associations, because what we also see is that COVID can react in creating bigger problems. So families and children can also be mad with the system or so, that they are not taken seriously. You know, in Italy, we've seen, of course, with people in hospitals and so on, this sort of urge later on to get into communication after things go wrong in a COVID period. So there they organized restorative circles and conferences to see what can be restored. So that's again another aspect which I would like to know if you in your countries and systems, and maybe Marije can also say, are there cases within the court or within this Child Protection Board that are so serious that people want afterwards a restorative justice intervention to to heal or to do something to make it, make justice good again. So many things, sorry for that.
Yeah, thank you, Annemieke. So Annemieke Wolters from Restorative Justice Netherlands is a partner also in, is actually one of the group of the expert team in the Focus project, and also partnering with Terre des Hommes in another project on restorative justice. So thank you for your insight. Before I let the panel maybe make a comment, I would like to give the floor to Bruno Monteiro. I think your microphone is activated. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mariama and Orina, for the kind invitation. As mentioned in the chat, so I'm the project manager at Validity Foundation. We're currently also implementing an EU project called Child Friendly Justice that's pretty much on the same topic as Focus, although we're focusing specifically on children in vulnerable situations. So individual assessment for children with mental disabilities, children with parental care, and accompanied minors. So that's the added advantage, but we're hoping just to work very closely with Focus and other projects. And we're currently at the fieldwork stage of the project, which is not finished, but we already started well, collecting some interesting, some disturbing, other very promising practices. And actually, maybe that will help consider just a more nuanced approach in general when it comes to individual assessments. For example, we've noticed that as some participants mentioned that children tend to be more tax savvy. And for example, there were a couple of interviews in Italy. They reported that a way for actually to ensure individual assessment during the COVID-19 lockdown was actually relying on apps like WhatsApp and generally by phone, so they can maintain contact with children. That was very useful. But then, of course, when we consider then the use of apps or technology in general for children with mental disabilities, then the paradigm is just different. What kind of things are actually be useful? But we're actually looking more into that. Of course, also as participants mentioned, a lot of interviews they report logistic issues. Actually interesting, it was more professionals that they consider it was more difficult to have the ICT running and more adapt to it, rather than children that seem to be more used to it. But of course, but this of course has to take into consideration that of course not all children are actually able to have access to that kind of technology. And also just another point, but I think this is very relevant to the question that Mariama was asking about the right to participation. So what we've found in a couple of countries is, okay, individual assessment is fragmented. They do it very differently. Some countries do it investigation stage. Others can actually do several individual assessment, but investigation during trial stage, and different people can actually do it, either prosecutors or judges. But in addition to all of that, I think the high concern that we found is there is some sort of let's say an attitude issue of when it comes to the relevance of child's testimony and actually the value of the individual assessment itself. In the sense that there's especially in still early in the research, but there's a perception from our researchers that, for example, in Italy and Bulgaria, where they don't really view children as subject of rights, but more like they're only worthy of charity, of mercy. So, in the sense that okay, that maybe an assessment is done, but then that they actually take into consideration, that's a very big question. That there's a lot of skepticism about it. It seems so. Something that we would like to focus in our project and would like to discuss as well is to what extent this individual assessment should be subject to more strict rules in consideration what weight should be placed in them. But this is just our preliminary findings, and of course we'll be happy to share once the research is done.
Thank you very much, Bruno. I can see really that there'll be very strong links that can be created between what's being done in Focus and what you're doing in your project, especially because Bulgaria and Romania are also two joint countries that we work in both projects. So I think I would like to maybe have Rebecca mentioning something. I think you wanted to react to some of the comments, and I see we have, let's say, 9 minutes left. So I will then see if one of the panelists would like to share. And I see also that Carolina would like to share something, but it needs to be very brief in order for us to finish on time.
And this is the part where we all wish we had more time in each other's company, yes. But hopefully we will. So I just want to mention a few words. Process. One of the key points is that we see this as a process, not a once-off tick the box exercise. And everything that people have been saying really cast a spotlight on that. We saw from what Karina said that you need the individual assessments all the way through to when you're just about to anticipate releasing a child into, back into society. So it's at both the very beginning and all the way through. So a process, and that means something to how we design things. Multidisciplinary, going to kind of Angela's point, there's the lawyer is there to act in the child's stated interests under their instruction. Is it in the child's interest for a lot of information to be shared, or is it not? So the lawyer plays that role and protects that child's interest. Other actors are involved and they have different responsibilities. So working in a multidisciplinary way is a way to ensure that we can take care of these different responsibilities. And when there's a tension arising between them, they can be addressed. That goes also to what Bruno just said, this whole kind of notion of, that we're going to be able somehow to look after the best interests of the child, and we'll decide that. And that's a kind of a gut instinct or soft issue. No, we need a bit of rigor here. These are formal decisions, and looking at individual assessments has to be done very carefully. And how you decide, how you maybe weigh between competing interests is important, how that feeds into the system. So a bit of rigor, a bit of that it's formal and robust, and versatile. The versatility of the process comes up from so many things that people have said. Maria, when you talked about the need to balance and mitigate and what we're learning, now we have a few more things in our toolbox, as it were. It's interesting that the Dutch process may well think of less, of using non-in-person when that can help. And bringing it back to the Commission, I mean, all of this is about kind of multidisciplinary case management and justice being part of an integrated child protection system. Justice is one component and there are other components. Of course, the Commission and DG Justice has played a big role in underlining that we need to have better and more integrated systems. And the Commission produced 10 principles in that regard, and that may come up in the strategy. So a few key words, and I'll beat a hasty retreat.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I would like to hear from Lynne. Actually, Lynne, you wanted to share with us some thoughts based on the comments made just now.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to keep it short. Everything is so interesting. I could respond to everything, but I want to make an advertisement for restorative justice here, of course. So I was happy with the connection that Annemieke made between the idea of the assessments and restorative justice, how we are still searching in that, and that made me think about if we are trying so much to let children and youth gain access, hear their needs, hear their thoughts, but that's the whole idea behind restorative justice, and especially behind mediation. The sooner you can give the voice directly to the offender, to the child, to the person, the sooner you will hear from them directly, because otherwise it's still something that comes behind, after the assessment, after. But the sooner the better for me. And also, as someone else mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused with the names, Angela, I think, about that at that point, it's very early in the proceedings that the youngster also can reject, can also say, no, I don't want to participate in this or this. So therefore, I want to say that maybe this situation can also be an opportunity to install the idea behind the restorative way of dealing with conflicts. Because we see, I think, in all countries that there's more the need rises to engage in supportive communities, in shared values. You see examples like people clapping at 8 p.m. for the health services, for example. People recreate rituals and try to support each other, try to support people, neighbors and people in their streets, etc. So I think this can be also a good thing. It can be an opportunity to set the spotlight on the restorative approach towards dealing with conflicts.
Thank you very much to bring really that perspective to us. We had there was a last question that if is Carolina Babica, if it's possible, but to keep it very, very short, so then we can go and wrap up. So please unmute. You need to unmute yourself. No. Oh, I'm not sure. Then maybe we can. Maybe now we cannot mute. So maybe if you put your comments.
Yes.
Oh no, now it's working. Yes, please go ahead.
So it didn't work so far. Sorry. Thanks so much. I will try to be very brief. I just also wanted to share something very briefly from the practice project that the International Commission of Jurists is running together with Forum for Human Rights. I mean, what we can share from the research we've done so far in 5 EU countries and the UK, I must say we were also a little bit disappointed by the research, and especially by the way the individual assessment is done. We didn't feel that there was a very strong element of the involvement of the child in basically none of these countries. I mean, to different extents, but that's what's really our first feeling. And oftentimes we saw the child was more involved as a source of information rather than a right holder and a participant to the proceeding. So I just wanted to highlight this. Also, what we identified was that in most cases the assessment was mainly used towards suggesting the best option for sentencing, which is one of the aims of the assessment, also as stipulated in the directive. But what was really missing often was the impact on the proceedings in question, and that was not very often reflected. And we think really this is, one of the main goals, also to bring in the best interests of the child principle. So our findings really would concur also with the findings presented by Bruno related to attitudes. And so I'm happy you raised it. And we also believe, restorative justice principles could be something to really implement in the individual assessment processes.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm very glad that you had the time to hear from you. I really think we will follow up with you and with Bruno, and I think it would be great that maybe that next year we organize one event that could be all together, so we can. I really see that there would be a need for that. So, is there something that our panelists would like to say in just a last reaction before on what was said? if you want to, then raise your hand. I saw that Silvia Randazzo, also Silvia, you mentioned in the chat a comment also, that indeed the link also with restorative justice, that indeed we need to look at the perspective that individual assessment could help professionals identify needs and strengths of children and assessing eligibility of every single child to a restorative response and to specific kind of response. I want to mention also that for focus, what you're mentioning, Carolina, of extreme importance is the point of view of children, that we are working with child advisory boards in focus in 5 of the countries. We have a group of 10 to 15 children that are advising the project professionals throughout the work, for the trainings, there will be child-led advocacy campaigns, so a series of activity where we will actually hear from the children themselves, and we hope that this could actually contribute to a bit of a better integration of the understanding of the needs of children. So while saying this, I would like to say that indeed this discussion, and we're closing now this series of 2 webinars, very rich discussion on victims last week, child suspect this week. And we see that this actually is only the beginning for us of many of the main reflections and maybe follow up online discussions for the moment until we can meet face to face. We see that in this time of COVID and the broad justice needs to remain child-centered. We have identified some difficulties, but also we have today listened to some opportunities that are open, the fact that digitalization is not an obstacle, but is actually an opportunity if we look at it from the eyes of the children, and maybe professionals need to actually, maybe we need to speed up a little bit and be and update ourselves with the opportunities given by the new technologies. So we will gather all these inputs. We will like you to stay connected with us. If you have any questions, you can refer to us. Orinda, that is here, is the project coordinator for Focus, so you can email her. You can email also the experts that are working in this project. We will be very happy. Follow us on Facebook with the TDH Europe and the other partners organization. Also on Child Hub, there are some news also about the project. And well, we will have make this recording available online on the Child Hub platform. So please feel free to also share it with other colleagues and friends that you have working with children. So thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for the panelists, for each one of you to have taken the time to be with us today. Thank you to Tamash in the background from the Child Hub to enable us to have this online meeting happening. And I wish you all to stay safe and to have a nice month of December and end of year with your families. And I hope that we can continue our interesting discussion in 2021. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.